This is one of the scariest shark stories that I personally know of and have ever heard, and I really don't think it gets too much scarier than this. It all started back in July of 1983 when 28-year-old Ray Boundy was captaining his 14-meter or 45-foot long trawling vessel, the New Venture, off the northeast coast of Australia, and he was out there fishing for prawns. He had with him his friend and deckhand, 24-year-old Dennis Murphy, and his girlfriend, who was also acting as the ship's cook, 21-year-old Linda Horton. Now, on the evening of the 25th of July, the three of them had run into a pretty bad squall or storm. And at midnight that night, or I guess technically the next morning of the 26th, two large waves had hit the New Venture, swamping the vessel and causing it to capsize. Now, at the time that it capsized, Ray and Linda were in the wheelhouse together, so when it tipped over, they're now under the water. But luckily, they were pretty easily able to make their way out of the wheelhouse and swim up to the surface, where Dennis was already waiting for them treading water. When the waves had hit, Dennis had been out on the deck, and so he was just able to jump off the boat and safely get clear of it before it tipped over. So now the three of them are in the water, and they clamber up onto the now overturned hull of the New Venture, and they're sitting there trying to come up with a plan. Ray tells the other two that he knows from just having plotted their course and their position just before they were capsized that they are 95 kilometers away from Townsville, Australia, where they set off from, and that's like the closest point on the Australian mainland. For those of us in the United States, that's about 60 miles away. And he knows they're about 45 kilometers away from the nearest island. That's about 27 miles. So what they decide to do is they're going to try and make a swim for the nearest point of the Great Barrier Reef, because at least then they can get up out of the water, and that will, at least in their mind, drastically improve their chances of survival. It sounds much better than just floating in open water in the middle of the ocean. So they begin gathering what little supplies they can, and this is basically just stuff from the boat that is floated up to the surface. So they're able to collect a surfboard, a cooler, some styrofoam boxes that they would have used to keep prawns that they caught in, and a life ring. And they use a rope that they find to tie this all together to make kind of like a small makeshift raft. So by this time, it's starting to get daylight. You know, it's early morning on the 26th, and they begin swimming in the direction that they know that this reef is in. So that first day actually goes really well. They think they're making pretty good progress, and the three of them, surprisingly, are in pretty good spirits. You know, they're talking back and forth to each other, motivating each other. They know they're going to be able to make this reef. So they swim all day long. It's going really well. At some point, the raft that they've bound together with this rope, it kind of just comes apart. They can't keep these items. There's no really good way to keep them all tied together. So eventually they decide they're going to abandon the raft idea, and each one of them is just going to hold on to their own personal, flotation device. So now the three of them are still sticking as close as they can together, swimming together, but each one of them's got their own device. So they swim all through the day, and they're still swimming when it comes into the nighttime. And it's a dark night out. There's not too much moonlight. There's enough to see each other and kind of just the surface of the water, but they can't see anything underneath the water, obviously, and they can't see too awfully far away. At about 2 a.m., all three of them see a large fin surface right next to them. And immediately they know, this is not a dolphin, this is not a whale, this is a shark. So Ray, he kind of, he's encouraging the other two. He says, look, guys, this thing is just curious. It's just checking us out. Shark attacks are extremely rare. If we just leave it alone, if we don't provoke it, if we don't agitate it, it's just going to come, it's going to check us out, and it'll leave us alone. So, the other two are like, okay, and they're trying to build up their courage, and they continue on swimming. A few minutes later, Ray feels this huge shark swim right underneath him. And then he feels it. He can, feel the water pressure. He feels it turn around, and it grabs him by the leg above and below his knee. and it just gives him just a light little nibble before Ray kicks it as hard as he can with his other foot, and the shark immediately lets go. It hardly bit into him, but he is bleeding now, and everybody knows it. So now people are starting to panic a little bit because now there's blood in the water. But Ray does his best to kind of just try and reassure them again, and they keep on swimming. They don't see the shark for another 10 minutes. They don't see a fin. They don't see anything. Again, they can't see under the water. 10 minutes go by of them just swimming along when all of a sudden Dennis begins screaming bloody murder. And he says, and I quote, or I should say he screams, "It's got my leg! The bastard's got my leg!" And he's just kind of being tugged around. And Ray goes to swim over to try and help. And by the time Ray gets there, the shark has let go of Dennis. But it's very clear that Dennis's leg is completely gone. It's been amputated. And at this point, Dennis realizes he's not going to make it. There is no chance that he's going to survive this. They don't have anything to make a tourniquet with, but Linda and Ray are kind of searching for something, maybe an article of clothing or something that they can use to make a tourniquet, stop the bleeding with. But as they're searching and not finding anything, Dennis would basically just tell them, he would say, "You guys need to swim for it. I'm not going to make it." And he would actually push off of them, and he would swim about 4 or 5 strokes away before this 15-foot or 4.5-ish meter tiger shark would come up and grab him again, launching another predatory attack against him. And Dennis would begin screaming. In the words of Ray, and I quote, he said, "Dennis was screaming. I couldn't believe he had the guts to do what he did for us. It was like watching a human being put through a mincer." That is what Ray said. So Dennis is screaming as Linda and Ray swim as fast as they can away. And obviously they are just in shock. Linda is uncontrollably screaming at this point because both of them were within a few meters watching this happen to their friend. Linda is uncontrollably screaming as they begin to swim away. Ray grabs her, and eventually he's able to kind of talk her down. She stops screaming, but obviously, she's still in shock, and so is he, basically. But they swim as fast as they can out of there. And they swim for about another 2 hours until this same shark, or at least Ray thinks it's the same shark. It was another tiger shark, another one that he says was about 15 feet or 4.5 meters long. He thinks it was the same one. They see this giant fin surface right next to them again, and it begins circling them, okay? It's circling them at this point. It's now 4 in the morning, so it's not quite daylight yet. It's still the middle of the night, and this fin is circling around them. Linda is freaking out, again, obviously. So is Ray, but, he just convinces her all they can do is just keep swimming. So they keep swimming. The fin eventually disappears for just a moment before it comes back up, and it begins circling them again. And at some point, the fin turns, it ceases its circle, and it just makes a beeline straight for Linda. And at this point, Ray says that the shark launched itself up at her. Its head came over halfway out of the water, and he can now clearly see that, yes, this is a huge tiger shark. And it grabbed Linda around her chest and both of her arms. So its whole mouth is basically around her whole upper body. And he said she just let out one little squeal, like a little mumble, basically, before the shark then came back down in the water, at which point that flipped Linda upside down. And she had been sitting and swimming in the harness of that life raft, of the life ring. So it flips her in that ring upside down. And he said it was just violently shaking her. And he knew that she was dead basically as soon as it had grabbed her. There's absolutely nothing that he can do, so he just, in an absolute panic, begins swimming again as fast as he possibly can out of there. And he swims, until daylight comes. He's still swimming until he gets to within 200 meters or so of the reef. He can see this reef coming out of the water, and he knows if he can just make it there, he's at least safe from this absolute monster that's been terrorizing him and his two friends who are now gone for the last 36 hours. So he is swimming as fast as he can towards it. He hasn't seen the shark since it took Linda, but like out of a horror movie, he sees this fin come up right next to him again. And he knows that the shark is going to get him at this point. There's no way he can outswim it. But like an act of God, basically, he ends up getting into like the surf zone of this reef, and he's able to catch a big wave that he body surfs basically into the reef. And the shark, had it been determined, definitely could have caught up with him, probably, but it didn't. And he's able to make it to this reef. And shortly thereafter, an Australian search and rescue helicopter would find him stranded there on that reef and rescue him. And he's got, the big tiger shark bite. They would confirm it was a tiger shark later on by the wounds. He's got this big bite on his leg. And so they fully believe his story when right after he's rescued, he recounts the last 36 hours to his rescuer, telling them what happened to Dennis and Linda. And to this day, it remains one of the most terrifying true life shark encounters. I mean, like I said, at least that I know about. There might be some worse ones out there, but not that I'm aware of. They actually based a Hollywood movie off of this event. It's called The Reef. Now, it doesn't follow the real true life events of this case accurately at all. But if you've ever seen The Reef, that is based off of this event.